So joining us now from Jerusalem for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspaper from around the world is Adefemi Akinsoye. Adefemi, great to have you. Shalom. Adefemi, shalom.
Good morning, Rufai.
Morning.
And good morning to you, Benga. Shalom to you both. Great to hear your voices. Let's get straight into it. Well, before we discuss, which has really been the pressing story in terms of international news, we do have some breaking news first to attend to, and that is that former Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Odinga has died, passed away at the age of 80. He did die in India, where he was receiving treatment, and it is believed that he died due to a cardiac arrest. That's according to lines from the Odinga family. That being said, Raila Odinga formed a formidable voice in Kenyan opposition politics, surely a thorn in the side of a former Kenyan leader, Uhuru Kenyatta, and of course of William Ruto. And his death, though unexpected and definitely painful for his loved ones, does mark the end of an era for Kenyan democracy. So we will continue to extend our condolences to the people of Kenya and indeed to the Odinga family. Now, coming back to the Middle East, here in Jerusalem, all eyes and ears are looking at this shaky, this fragile ceasefire that we are seeing between Israel and Hamas, and what we're seeing, of course, across the border in Gaza. Now, overnight, we did see the news that 4 more bodies were handed over by Hamas back into Israeli custody. This is something that happened off the back of Israel threatening to cut and or restrict aid coming into Gaza if Hamas did not hand over the remains of hostages that had unfortunately lost their lives while in captivity. Now, we have to widen out this context and understand that it was just yesterday that the Red Cross came out and discussed that this is going to be a process that will take time, that is repatriating and initially just finding the remains because of the level of destruction in Gaza, the rubble there. So Red Cross had already said that this process of repatriating, of recovering bodies, of returning them into Israel will take time. And this is something that Israel has made clear that it does not have a lot of. It does not have the time to wait when it comes to wanting these bodies back. And as we heard in the report, that forms the consensus of the Israeli people that I had spoken to, that for them this is unfinished business. Surely they are happy and rejoice at the return of the 20 living hostages. But there is still the remains of the hostages who died while in captivity, who were killed while in captivity, and they want their bodies back so that they could be buried according to Israeli and Jewish rites and have that final resting place given to them. I mentioned that there is still one woman among those remains that is yet to be identified, whether or not she is in these 4 that were handed over overnight, or whether she still remains in the throes of Gaza. And this just again forms really what is tying many Israeli people away from being able to truly celebrate. They want the closure of every set of remains brought back into the country. So that's what we're seeing here. Again, the bigger context is whether or not this ceasefire will hold. We did see and hear reports of Israel shooting at least 5 people in parts of the occupied territories. It was believed that those people, those Palestinians, had crossed the yellow line, crossed the ceasefire boundaries, and were approaching Israeli troops, and that is why the IDF opened fire. They openly confirmed that they had done so. And then also there had been some form of attacks that attacked a residential building. We saw the pictures of the rubble in the report and thereafter, and that also unfortunately led to the loss of Palestinian lives. These issues, this violence happening in the background, only further heightens tensions about whether or not this ceasefire will hold. You'll notice that many people are reluctant to call this peace. What they are comfortable to say is that this is a ceasefire, and they are committed to making sure that it holds. But for them, the bottom line is that every Israeli hostage remains should be returned. And then also for the Palestinians too, there are still going to be the anticipation for more Palestinian prisoners to be returned back into Palestine. We did hear also from prisoners who talked about the torture that they endured while in Israeli prisons, the beatings, the unfair treatment, and then also when they are relieved, any type of happiness that they may feel, for many of them was short-lived when they they come back to find that their families had unfortunately been killed while they were in prison. And this just underscores the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing in Palestine. More than 64,000 people, civilians, had been killed by Israeli bombardment. So really, on both sides of this is loss, is destruction, is unhappiness, and really a lack of trust. And that forms the fragility of this ceasefire. So that's what we're seeing here in the Middle East. But indeed, we will move on to some other world stories as part of the World Brief. Let's take a look now at Madagascar. We talked about this yesterday, and the scenes are getting even more historic. Now, just yesterday, we mentioned that President Andry Rajoelina, had fled the country. He said that he had run away because of threats to his life, and he was lifted out of Madagascar by a French military plane. He does have French citizenship, and thereafter we do see that he has essentially been pushed out of government, him being his leadership being repealed in Parliament. And this is something that has brought a lot of happiness to the people of Madagascar. We are seeing celebrations on the streets, and this is even after the military have taken control. This is another example on the African continent, albeit, Madagascar being away from, the actual geographical mainland portion of the continent. But this is just another example about how the shakiness of democracy continues to reverberate across the African continent. And this is something that is not good for those who do believe in upholding democracy, that this is another example of the military taking control. However, we do know that they have called for elections to be held, democratic elections to be held within the next 30 to 60 days. So that is definitely something positive to move to. But in terms of Rajoelina, he hasn't himself formally resigned. He still believes himself to be the leader of the Malagasy people. But as it stands here, with the rejection of him from the people, with the overrunning of Parliament by the military, him losing any type of loyalty to the military, and him now being repealed in Parliament, it just shows that at almost every corner, Rajoelina has been rejected. And that really just forms the lion's share of our World Brief today. It was definitely looking at Raila Odinga's breaking news, his death, then, of course, Madagascar and what we're seeing there, and then finally the Middle East issue. We are very much so looking at whether or not this ceasefire will hold, despite, on one hand, Israel adamant that it wants all remains returned. And, of course, this is something that Palestine also wants. They want all of their prisoners returned. All of this happening while civilians on the ground in Palestine and indeed in Israel, across Israel, are hoping that no more bloodshed will happen and that truly peace will be on the horizon and will be a reality in the Middle East. Those are your stories on the World Brief. Love to hear your thoughts before we move on to the papers.
Okay, Femi, very great words there put out there as regards what's happening in the Middle, and very lovely reported, I must have to say, out there in Jerusalem. As regards peace, yes, it takes two to tango. And for peace to come, all the bodies must do what will make peace come. Quickly, both sides have already broken the ceasefire. Hamas on one part, Israel on the other part. The question will be, would cool heads prevail? But you see, the long-term question they've not answered is, how will Gaza be run? I do not think President Trump, even in his agreement, the 20-point plan, has been able to itemize the precept by precept of what the Board of Peace will do. Because a conundrum has occurred now, Femi. Hamas is back on the streets in Gaza. It's already causing skirmishes. Inter-clan rivalry and inter-family rivalry is already happening. All the dastardly hard we condemn Hamas for is already back there. Israeli soldiers killing Palestinians, that's another sore point. So as we speak today, that place is in limbo. So probably when they ship back the bodies to Israel and the swap is completed, then we will know what this, what's it called, peace committee or board of peace will be able to do. But the best way possible will be a government that can involve the Palestinian Authority, that's Fatah, to be able to run Gaza and run the West Bank. And probably, as things pan out, we should have independent elections around that area so we can have a level of sovereignty. As regards Madagascar, I am not surprised. If you go back historically, the same elite military units that Rajoelina used against Marc Ravalomanana has now come back to fight him and hunt him. And when you check the history of Madagascar, it's always been that about wars. In the 70s, you remember Ratcharaka. That was the exact thing. Military ushered him in. Rajoelina used to be a DJ. Military ushered in him because they felt that the high-handedness of Marc Ravalomanana was going to cause a problem. The same military has gone against him today. And as the plot goes on, when leaders do not do well, don't forget they always have another passport. So it is now that we know that Rajoelina owns another passport. How can a man have two passports and you expect him to be loyal to his country? But that's what has happened. Because Macron obviously had used Rajoelina all this while. He had become a puppet to France. And that's why it was Macron that was part of those that negotiated the safe exit from that place. So now that the military has impeached him, the story is almost the same. There's virtually no African leader you see that does not have a foot in the West or maybe even have a passport somewhere. As regards Raila Odinga, at the end of an era, this was a man that fought the might of Uhuru Kenyatta, that fought, even from the Kibaki days, that fought, that fought Ruto, and finally aligned with Ruto, that fought the likes of Miguna, and a couple of other top Kenyan politicians out there. The sad reality is that despite how much he tried, he never became president. But we will not also forget his service to his country. Although those on the opposing side will also have their own tales to tell about Odinga, that they only did those things to favor him. Benga, I would like to take some of your thoughts, then we go into papers.
Okay, thank you very much, Rufai. We expressed our skepticism about the fragile ceasefire deal and about what life would be in Gaza. Like you said, how would Gaza be run? And when you look at the situation, the 20-point peace plan, the flying the ointment appears to be the issue of the demilitarization of Gaza and also the disarmament of Hamas. The question is, would Hamas be willing to give up its arms? Because that's the last grip of survival that they have. And now when you also monitor the slow pace of the release of the diseased hostages, and we also heard that Israel has attacked Palestine even under the ceasefire condition and killing about 9 Palestinians. So that threatens the ceasefire deal. I argued with someone yesterday that the best that can be obtained from this situation is an armistice. That's the temporary stoppage of exchange of fireworks in the area. So when you look at this situation, how would world leaders sustain this? You talked about 70 billion US dollars for the reconstruction, but when you look at the necessary hurdles, which are the 3 R's of post-war situation, the return to peace for a post-war situation like Gaza, that's reconciliation. Are there change of notes? Are there handover of notes? Are there exchange of notes? Are there comparing notes on how they would be able to find a sustainable plan to peace? And in terms of reconstruction, the amount have been raised, but what about the modalities? Who would be the funding partners in this cost of reconstruction? And also rehabilitation. The amount of emotional trauma, the scars people say that are still visible. So how would all these issues be addressed? Coming to Madagascar, this is further reaffirming the slumming of democracy into crisis. Now, a lot of us have talked about military coups in Africa, but very little mention have been raised on some underlying coups too, like legal coups and constitutional coups. Here is someone, Rajanila, Andre Rajanila, that has his allegiance divided in terms of his passport, having an allegiance to France and also having a divided one with Madagascar. So while the Gen Zs have spoken, and it seems that as a matter of urgency, there is a need for us to find a system of governance, you can call it democracy, to address the fragile situation of politics in Africa. I think there is a need for a reform to see what benefits us and to find our own homegrown model that would address some of these challenges. A little crisis, a little protest that started from shortage of water supply and electricity shows that the patience is running short of the citizens. They demand good governance. And that was the protocol signed by ECOWAS and also the African Union, the ECOWAS on democracy, development, and good governance. So are the African leaders making a lip service to this? What are the concrete plans to strengthen the institution of democracy in Africa? Look at what is happening in Cameroon too. So all this, and now they have also come up with a 60-day transition plan. I very much criticize this idea of 60-day transition plan. I think it undermines and it threatens the credibility of the process. And also, they would have to determine who is the real leader of Madagascar, because we still have Andre Rajoelina claiming legal ownership to the leadership of Madagascar. So all this, they would need to have a conference, a talk that would really outline the paths to progress and a return to democracy in Madagascar. Otherwise, the situation where we think that it's just a mere announcement could get worsened. It's a very fragile situation, a very volatile one that I think countries would need to also show some concern. I was talking about the peer review mechanism that former President Olusegun Obasanjo and Abdulaziz Bouteflika and Thabo Mbeki formed in the early 2000s. So what happens to the peer review mechanism that measures the level of democracy, development, and governance in Africa? I think there's a need to reinforce this peer review mechanism so that Africans can be their true brother's keeper. And coming to the loss of Raila Odinga, I think that's a huge loss to democracy in Africa. He ran for 5 times, though. He never made it. He never won the election. But you remember that he's been a symbol of resilience in Kenya's politics, coming from that very deadly election in 2007. And Kenya was able to come out of this, and what we've seen, he has shown his political resilience and contributions and his firm belief in the prosperity of Kenya. Just the last election that was held, he accepted the Supreme Court judgment, that the outcome of the Supreme Court judgment, and he later contested for the chairmanship of the African Union, which he lost. So I think that it's a life that leaves sterling legacy in terms of democracy in Africa. I wish, may his soul rest in peace.
Right, Femi. Local stories.
Back to you, Rufai.
Yeah.
Your wonderful admissions to the World Brief today. Thank you very much to you both. Let's move on to newspapers this morning. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. Naturally speaking, we're looking at This Day, and it's a commendation of this investment coming from Shell. Now, it does lead with the federal government commending Shell Petroleum Development Company for its fresh $2 billion investment in Nigeria's gas sector. This Day goes on to note that the project is expected to boost gas gas output, create thousands of jobs, and create ongoing energy transition efforts. Government officials have described the move as a vote of confidence in Nigeria's economy and a step towards achieving greater energy self-sufficiency. Now, the New Telegraph this morning does report that the federal government and power generation companies have reached an agreement over a 4 trillion naira debt in the electricity sector. The deal is aimed at stabilizing power supply and restoring confidence in the industry by resolving long-standing financial disputes between the government and the Gencos. Moving on to the Daily Independent. Let's take a look at the Daily Independent. It does report that Enugu State Governor Peter Mba has described his defection to the All Progressive Congress as something bigger than politics. I do know that our very own Vimbai Mutiniri Ekpenyong was there during his media parlay, and she heard Mba say that his decision was driven by a desire to align with national development goals and strengthen collaboration with the federal government. Now, on the same topic, let's take a look at The Guardian this morning. It does report that Enugu State Governor Peter Mba's defection to the APC now ends PDP's 26-year political dominance in Enugu State. Party leaders have described the move as a major realignment that could reshape political dynamics in the southeast ahead of the 2027 elections. Let's move on to The Punch. The Punch does lead with the cost of petrol continuing to soar across the country, with fresh supply challenges hitting the market. Now, according to The Punch, petrol prices have climbed close to 1,000 naira per litre in major cities. That's as supply from the Dangote refinery slows down. Now, IPMAN, the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, does blame depot owners for hiking ex-depot prices after the refinery temporarily halted fuel loading. To the Vanguard does report that mathematics is no longer compulsory for arts and humanities candidates seeking university admission. Now, the paper does say that JAM made the change to make admissions more flexible and better suited to each discipline, though maths remains mandatory for science and social science courses. Let's take a look at the UK Guardians. We'll round up our newspaper with the UK Guardian, which reports that tensions are rising after Israel halted humanitarian aid deliveries to Gaza. Now, the paper goes on to report that the move does follow renewed clashes along the border and comes amid mounting international pressure to restore civilian access. Aid agencies warn that the suspension could deepen Gaza's already dire humanitarian crisis, with food and medical supplies already running dangerously low. Now, you already mentioned this fragility here, and many people on both sides of this conflict can only hope that this is not something that materializes, most especially for the people of Gaza. They do desperately need that humanitarian aid, and so it would have sent shockwaves when Israel threatened to restrict or even stop aid coming into the country. And as you've rightfully mentioned, violence continues to rear its ugly head, both with the IDF killing Palestinians and also within Gaza itself. We did see images of Hamas operatives or masked gunmen executing men that they believed to be collaborating with Israeli forces. So there is, unfortunately, still pockets of violence, even as we discuss peace. But as ever, the general consensus is that all parties should move forward to realizing peace in the Middle East. That is your World Brief and your newspaper reviews from here in Jerusalem. Thank you.
Shalom, shalom, shalom. Thank you so much, Femi. And I'm just trying to brush up my Hebrew. Okay, thank you so much. Maybe tomorrow, I'll speak some very good Hebrew tomorrow.